Ma'am, I asked you twice. Step over here and give me your ID.
I'm standing right here. I'm not refusing. I'd like to know why I'm being stopped.
Because we asked. Let's not make it harder than it has to be.
I'm cooperating. My wallet's in my jacket. I'm reaching for it now.
Keep your hands rocking.
The gas station was quiet in the way that feels almost staged. No cars at the pumps. No traffic passing by. Just the low hum of electricity and the faint click of a fuel nozzle locking into place. It was 3:52 inches the afternoon when a black woman in jeans and a gray hoodie stepped out of her SUV and began pumping gas. Completely alone. She didn't know she was being watched. Across the street, an unmarked white SUV sat idling with the engine running. Inside, ICE agent Victor Hale leaned forward in his seat, eyes fixed on her movements. 9 years on the job had taught him to trust what he called instinct. And right now, his instinct told him this was an opportunity. A single woman, no witnesses, no crowd, no cameras nearby except the ones he controlled. He opened his door. 2 other agents followed without a word. They moved quickly, spreading out as they crossed the concrete, forming a loose semicircle around her before she even realized they were there. The sound of boots against pavement broke the silence. "Ma'am," Hale said sharply, flashing his badge. "We need to see proof of citizenship." The words hung in the air, heavy and sudden. The woman looked up, surprised but not shaken. She glanced around the empty station, then back at the 3 federal agents now blocking her space. Her hand stayed steady on the pump. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "On what grounds?" she asked. Hale didn't answer the question. He just stepped closer. Now. For a brief moment, the scene looked like countless others that never make the news. A routine stop. A routine demand. A black woman expected to comply quietly and move on. But there was something different in the way she stood. Straight-backed. Alert. Unafraid. What Hale didn't know was that the woman he'd just stopped wasn't just another civilian running errands. He didn't know that she was a police lieutenant with over a decade on the force. He didn't know that every move he made from this moment forward would be replayed in court, frame by frame. And he certainly didn't know that this quiet gas station was about to become the starting point of a lawsuit that would cost nearly $10 million and end multiple federal careers. Her name was Lieutenant Maya Thompson, though none of the 3 agents knew that yet. At 41 years old, she had spent 11 years wearing a badge. The last 3 as a supervising lieutenant in one of the city's busiest precincts. She'd broken up domestic disputes that turned violent in seconds, stood between rival gangs in the middle of the night, and testified in courtrooms where one wrong word could dismantle an entire case. Calm under pressure wasn't a personality trait. It was survival training. Today, she was off duty. No uniform. No radio. Just jeans. A gray hoodie. And the mental checklist of errands she needed to finish before heading home. She turned off the pump with deliberate slowness and met the agent's stare without flinching. "I'm a United States citizen," she said evenly. "And I'm not required to show proof of citizenship without cause." The agent in front of her didn't like that answer. His jaw tightened, and the air between them shifted. "Driver's license," he snapped. Maya reached into her bag slowly, the same way she'd instructed civilians to do hundreds of times. She pulled out her Texas driver's license and handed it over. The agent examined it longer than necessary, then passed it to the woman standing at his side. The second agent studied the photo, the address, the name, as if searching for something that wasn't there. "This doesn't prove citizenship," the lead agent said at last. Maya nodded once, as if she'd expected that response. Without a word, she reached back into her bag and removed a worn leather badge wallet. She opened it and held it up at chest level, letting the gold shield catch the afternoon light. "Lieutenant," 11 years of service. For the first time since they'd approached her, the agents hesitated. Their confidence flickered. Just slightly. The lead agent took the badge, turned it over in his hands, then glanced at his partners. Something unspoken passed between them. Something cold and calculating. He handed the badge back. "All right," he said flatly. "You're free to go." No apology. No explanation. Just a dismissal. As if the moment had never happened, Maya accepted the badge, slid it back into her bag, and turned toward her vehicle. But as she did, a quiet warning bell rang in her mind, the kind that only experience can trigger. Because what she didn't hear wasn't reassurance. It was restraint. The agents turned and began walking back toward their SUV, their posture loosening as if the encounter was over. Maya stood beside her vehicle, watching them go, her pulse still steady but her instincts fully awake. 11 years on the force had taught her that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation is when you think it's finished. She reached for the fuel nozzle, eyes still tracking their movement. 10 feet. 15. Almost there. Then she noticed it. All three agents raised their hands to their chests at the exact same time. There was no conversation. No hesitation. Just 3 synchronized motions, practiced and precise. The small red lights on their body cameras, which had been blinking moments earlier, flickered once and went dark. Maya froze. Every alarm in her body went off at once. That single detail told her more than any words could. This wasn't procedure. This was intent. The agents stopped walking. Slowly. Deliberately. They turned back toward her. The casual masks were gone. The professional distance had vanished. What replaced it was something harder. Something stripped of pretense. The lead agent's eyes locked onto hers. His voice was low when he spoke. "You're not going anywhere." Before Maya could respond, hands slammed into her arms from both sides. One agent wrenched her right arm behind her back, forcing her forward. Another seized her left, twisting until pain shot up her shoulder. The sudden violence shattered the quiet of the station. "Stop resisting," someone shouted, even though she wasn't resisting at all. Cold metal snapped around her wrists. The cuffs tightened too far, biting into skin. Maya tried to speak, tried to assert her rank, her rights. But her words were drowned out by the scrape of boots and the hiss of spilled fuel as the nozzle tore free from her tank and clattered onto the concrete. "You think that badge protects you," the lead agent hissed close to her ear. "Out here, it doesn't." The slurs came next, whispered and deliberate, meant to humiliate more than intimidate. Maya clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay upright as they dragged her away from her vehicle. In that moment, she understood exactly what was happening. They had waited for isolation. They had accepted her credentials only to discard them. And now, with their cameras turned off and no witnesses in sight, they were making sure this stop would never be written up as a mistake. It would be written as nothing at all. They shoved her toward the SUV, boots scraping against concrete as her feet struggled to keep balance. The station felt unreal now, like a set abandoned mid-scene. The pump handle lay on the ground, fuel spreading in a thin, shimmering puddle that caught the afternoon light. Maya caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the car window, hands cuffed behind her back. Shoulders forced forward and locked it into memory. The rear door of the SUV flew open. She was pushed inside. Hard. Her shoulder slamming against the interior panel. The door closed with a heavy thud that swallowed the outside world. One agent climbed in beside her, his knee pinning her legs in place. Another took the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. Maya tried again. Calm. Clear. I'm a police lieutenant. You are violating federal and state law. The response was laughter. Low. Dismissive. Badge doesn't mean anything here, the lead agent said, from the front seat, without turning around. You should have stayed quiet. As the vehicle pulled away, Maya twisted to look out the rear window. Her SUV shrank in the distance. The open fuel door still hanging loose. The scene frozen exactly where they'd left it. A routine errand interrupted. A life temporarily erased. They didn't read her rights. They didn't explain the charge. They drove in silence. Taking back roads. Industrial streets. Routes chosen not for efficiency, but for isolation. Maya focused on her breathing, forcing her mind into assessment mode. Time. Direction. Every turn. Every word spoken. Every violation stacking neatly in her head. She felt the cuffs cutting deeper into her wrists with each bump in the road. The pain was sharp. Insistent. But she welcomed it. Pain kept her present. Present meant observant. Observant meant prepared. By the time the SUV slowed and rolled through a set of gates topped with razor wire, Maya already knew this wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about confusion. It was about control. And she knew one more thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't going to end quietly. The facility didn't look like any federal building Maya had ever worked with. No clear signage. No welcoming lights. Just concrete walls. Chain-link fencing. And coils of razor wire glinting under harsh floodlamps. The SUV rolled through a secured gate that closed behind them with a metallic slam, sealing her inside a system that suddenly felt very far removed from law and order. They pulled her out of the vehicle by the arm. The grip was tight enough to leave fingerprints. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing everything in a sickly white glow. A desk officer sat behind thick glass, barely looking up as the agents rattled off vague accusations, immigration concerns. Suspicious behavior. Failure to provide adequate documentation. Maya spoke clearly, forcing each word through clenched teeth. She identified herself again, gave her badge number from memory, named her precinct, cited procedure, requested a phone call. No one acknowledged a single word. Her belongings were taken one by one. Phone, wallet, keys, badge. Everything that connected her to the outside world was placed into a plastic bin and slid out of reach. The cuffs were finally removed, only to be replaced by the cold finality of a steel door slamming shut behind her. The holding cell was small, bare. A metal bench bolted to the wall. A toilet without a seat. No clock. No window large enough to tell time. Just silence broken by distant footsteps and the hum of electricity. Maya sat down slowly, wrists throbbing, red marks already forming where the cuffs had bitten too deep. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes not to rest, but to focus. This was the moment where panic was expected. Fear, confusion, compliance. Instead, Maya began building a case. She replayed the stops second by second. The lack of probable cause, the initial release, the coordinated body camera shutdown, the verbal abuse, the false arrest, the transport without charges, the denial of counsel. Every detail clicked into place like evidence being laid out on a table. They thought they had erased the record. What they didn't realize was that Maya was documenting everything in the only place they couldn't touch her memory. And somewhere outside those walls, time was moving forward, which meant someone would notice she was gone. 40 minutes away. Maya's absence had already begun to register. Her husband checked the time again. then glanced at the front door. Maya was never late without calling, especially not on a weekday afternoon. He opened the tracking app on his phone more out of habit than worry, expecting to see her icon inching along the highway toward home. It wasn't moving. He refreshed the screen. The location pin stayed fixed. He zoomed in, expecting a glitch, a signal delay, anything that made sense. What came up instead made his stomach drop. ICE detention facility. He stared at the screen, reread the address, then checked again. Same result. His wife, a police lieutenant with over a decade of service, was sitting inside a federal immigration facility. The logic didn't matter. The implications did. He didn't waste time calling her phone. He knew it would be off. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number Maya had given him years earlier, with one instruction attached. Only if something is seriously wrong. Captain Rene Alvarez answered on the second ring. He explained quickly, forcing his voice to stay steady as he described the location data. The lack of contact. The impossibility of the situation. Alvarez didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She already understood what this meant. Within minutes, she was in her car. Uniform on. Badge visible. Heading straight for the facility. During the drive, she made 2 calls, one to internal affairs. One she didn't log. When Alvarez pulled into the detention center parking lot, she saw 3 unmarked SUVs parked off to the side. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't coincidence. She walked inside with purpose, stopping at the front desk and placing her credentials against the glass. "I'm here for Lieutenant Maya Thompson," she said. Her voice controlled and unmistakably authoritative. She was unlawfully detained at this facility. The officer behind the glass hesitated, typed, paused. "There's no record of anyone by that name," he said finally. Alvarez leaned closer. "Then you have 5 minutes to fix that," she replied quietly. "Before this becomes a federal incident that doesn't stay contained." Somewhere down the hall, a steel door unlocked, and the balance of power began to shift. Maya walked out of the holding area slowly, her posture straight despite the stiffness in her wrists and shoulders. The red marks from the cuffs were still visible, raw and undeniable. Captain Alvarez met her eyes, taking in every detail without saying a word. Years of command experience told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't confusion. This was misconduct. They didn't linger. No paperwork was offered. No explanation given. Maya's belongings were returned in silence, slid across the counter as if nothing had happened. As they stepped back into the night air, the detention facility lights hummed behind them, indifferent and unchanged. On the drive home, Maya spoke calmly, recounting every moment with precision. The stop, the badge, the retreat, the cameras going dark, the arrest, the slurs, the denial of a phone call. Alvarez listened without interruption, already cataloging the violations in her mind. The first move came the next morning. Captain Alvarez requested security footage from the gas station. The owner complied without hesitation. When the video loaded, there was no ambiguity. The footage showed the agents approaching, Maya producing her credentials, the agents walking away. Then, in chilling clarity, all 3 reaching to their chests at the same time. Cameras off. Seconds later, they charged back into frame. The arrest played out in full view, violent, deliberate, unmistakable. There was no resistance, no threat, just power being exercised without consequence. By the end of the day, Internal Affairs had opened an investigation. By the end of the week, the footage had spread beyond the department. Millions of views. Public outrage. Questions no one at ICE could quietly dismiss. But the most damaging discovery came later. During a preliminary records review, Alvarez uncovered a pattern. 18 prior complaints filed against the same agents, all alleging racial profiling, all quietly closed, all buried. Maya wasn't the first person they'd targeted. She was just the one who survived long enough and knew enough to expose them. And now, the story was bigger than her. What began as an internal review quickly turned into something much larger. Maya didn't wait for the system to correct itself. She knew better than that. Within 48 hours, she contacted a civil rights attorney whose reputation was built on dismantling federal misconduct cases piece by piece. When she walked into his office, she didn't come as a shaken victim. She came prepared. She laid out the timeline without emotion. The unlawful stop, the acceptance of credentials, the false release, the synchronized shutdown of body cameras, the violent arrest, the slurs, the 6 hours of detention without charges, the denial of counsel. Each point wasn't just a grievance, it was a violation. And together, they formed a pattern no defense strategy could soften. The lawsuit was filed in federal court 1 week later. $9.9 million. False imprisonment. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Racial discrimination. Conspiracy. Discovery cracked the case wide open. Court orders forced ICE to release personnel files, internal emails, and digital records tied to the agents involved. What surfaced went far beyond Maya's arrest. On Agent Hale's government-issued laptop, investigators found a spreadsheet labeled casually, almost carelessly, a list of names, addresses, vehicle descriptions, workplaces, Black professionals living in suburban neighborhoods. Maya's name appeared halfway down the list. Added months before the stop at the gas station. The room went silent when her attorney saw it. This wasn't profiling in the moment. This was targeting in advance. Planning. Coordination. With that single file, the case transformed. It was no longer about 3 agents crossing a line. It was about an unofficial system operating in the shadows, protected by silence and dismissal. And now, that system was exposed. Because once something like that enters the court record, it doesn't disappear. It detonates. The fallout came fast. And it came hard. Within days of the spreadsheet becoming part of the court record, ICE placed all 3 agents on administrative leave. Their badges were confiscated. Their access to internal systems was revoked. The quiet confidence they'd carried for years vanished overnight, replaced by lawyers, silence, and damage control. Federal prosecutors stepped in before the agency could contain it. The charges were severe: false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights. Each count carried consequences that no internal suspension could erase. Agent Hale's past unraveled under scrutiny. Depositions exposed inconsistencies in his reports. Body camera logs confirmed deliberate shutdowns during enforcement actions. Witnesses from previous complaints once ignored were re-interviewed. This time, they were believed. The agents were fired before the trial ever reached a jury. Their law enforcement careers ended with no ceremony, no quiet reassignment, no second chances. Their names became shorthand inside the agency for what not to do when power goes unchecked. Public reaction was relentless. News outlets replayed the gas station footage in slow motion, freezing the exact frame where the cameras went dark. Lawmakers demanded hearings. Civil rights groups filed amicus briefs. The pressure built until ICE made a decision it rarely makes. They settled $9.9 million. the largest wrongful detention settlement in the region's history. But the money wasn't the real punishment. The real cost came afterward. When the case forced policy changes that could no longer be avoided: mandatory body camera activation rules, automatic discipline for deactivation, clear probable cause standards for stops, independent oversight with real authority. What had started as a quiet stop at an empty gas station had now rewritten procedure at a federal level, and for the first time, the power that had once moved in silence was being forced to answer in public. When the settlement was finalized, Maya didn't celebrate. There were no press conferences on her front lawn, no victory laps, no speeches about triumph. The money closed a case, but it didn't close the wound. What it did was give her something far more valuable than compensation. It gave her leverage. 6 months after the settlement, Maya turned in her resignation. 11 years on, the force ended with a single signature. Some colleagues understood, others didn't. But Maya had already crossed a line she couldn't step back from. She no longer wanted to work inside a system that had nearly erased her. She wanted to change it. She passed the bar quietly. No announcement. No celebration post. Just another credential added to a life defined by preparation. Within a year, Maya opened a small civil rights practice focused on cases most people were too afraid to bring. Teachers stopped on their way home. Nurses questioned in parking lots. Veterans detained without cause. People who had been told, again and again, that what happened to them was unfortunate but unprovable. Maya proved otherwise. She knew how officers thought. She knew how reports were written. She knew where language was softened and where truth was buried. And she knew how to expose intent when institutions hid behind policy. Her cases began to win. Not loudly. Methodically. Settlements. Policy changes. Quiet precedents that forced departments to rethink how they operated. What ICE had done to her had been meant to humiliate her, to remind her of her place. Instead, it clarified her purpose. She wasn't done with justice. She had just changed sides. As Maya's work expanded, so did the reach of her story. Law schools invited her to speak, not as a headline, but as a case study. Departments requested closed-door briefings. The kind meant less for public image and more for internal reckoning. In rooms filled with command staff and policymakers, she played the same clip over and over. 3 agents. Walking away. Turning back. Cameras going dark. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She explained how intent reveals itself not in chaos, but in coordination. How misconduct isn't always loud, but often quiet, procedural, and rehearsed. How systems fail not because of a few bad actors, but because too many people learn when to look away. Justice, she told them, isn't emotional. It's precise. Her case became required reading in constitutional law courses, cited alongside landmark civil rights rulings, not because of the settlement amount, but because of the evidence. The pattern, the documentation, the way a single moment, properly examined, could expose years of abuse hidden behind paperwork and silence. Outside the classrooms and courtrooms, Maya stayed grounded. She mentored young attorneys from communities most affected by profiling. She advised officers who wanted to do the job right but didn't know how to push back against toxic culture. She reminded them that accountability wasn't anti-law enforcement. It was the only thing that made the badge mean something. The footage from that gas station never stopped circulating. Millions of views. Endless commentary. But for Maya, it wasn't viral content. It was proof. Proof that when power assumes it will never be questioned, it leaves fingerprints everywhere. And all it takes is one person willing to notice them. Years later, the gas station on that corner looks exactly the same. Same pumps, same concrete, same quiet afternoons when nothing seems out of place. People stop there every day, swipe a card, pump gas, and leave without a second thought. No marker tells them what happened there. No plaque explains how close the system came to swallowing the wrong person. But the impact of that moment never faded. Because of one unlawful stop, dozens of policies were rewritten. Because of one woman who refused to stay silent, hundreds of others found the courage to speak. And because 3 agents believed power meant immunity, an entire institution was forced to confront what it had allowed to grow unchecked. Maya Thompson never set out to become a symbol. She was just running errands, just trying to get home. But when the system tried to reduce her to nothing more than the color of her skin, she responded with preparation, discipline, and truth. She understood something that day that many never do. Justice doesn't arrive by accident. It arrives because someone documents, challenges, and endures long enough to force it into the light. So the next time you hear about a routine stop, remember this story. Remember how quickly routine can become abuse. And remember that accountability only exists when someone is willing to demand it. If this story made you pause, make sure to like this video. If you believe these stories matter, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because these moments don't belong to one city or one country. They belong to all of us. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of someone the system thought it could ignore.